The cold wind swept through Greenfield Cemetery in New Jersey, rustling the yellowing leaves that had begun to gather around a freshly dug grave. The sky, heavy with gray clouds, seemed like the perfect backdrop to the sorrow that hung in the air. Among the small crowd of mourners stood Luke Montgomery, a man whose name was well known on Wall Street for his vast wealth, successful business empire, and unmatched power in the world of investments. But today, none of that mattered. Today, he was just a man who had lost the one person who had ever truly understood him. His wife, Sarah, had been his everything. She was the only one who had ever seen beyond the cold facade he wore, the only one who had known the man behind the money and the ruthless decisions. They had built a life together, filled with love, laughter, and regrets. One regret that had always haunted them was their inability to have children. Over the years, they'd come to accept it, but now, standing by her grave, it felt as though part of him had been buried with her. The funeral was grand, as expected. Greenfield's upper class, the same people who had always been there for the latest gossip or the next big deal, had gathered, some out of genuine sorrow, others for the social event. Colleagues, business partners, and friends came forward to offer their condolences, each hug and handshake feeling scripted, mechanical. Luke barely noticed any of it. His world had become a silent void, drowning out the memory of Sarah's laughter, her warm voice that would never reach his ears again. He wanted them to leave, wanted the crowd to disappear, to leave him alone with his grief. But he knew that was impossible. A man like him was never truly alone, at least not in ways that mattered. As the service wrapped up and people began to trickle away, Luke stayed behind, staring at the polished wood of the coffin now being lowered into the ground. His fingers trembled as he tightened his coat around himself, feeling the cold bite through the fabric. His driver, Jack, an older man who had served the Montgomery family for years, stood patiently off to the side, knowing Luke needed this moment. Luke took a deep breath and began to walk toward the car, but something unusual caught his eye. 3 small figures stood near the edge of the cemetery, half hidden behind a large oak tree. 3 identical little girls, their brown hair tied neatly in ponytails, each wearing a matching navy blue coat. Their faces were pale, their expressions unreadable, but they stared at him with an intensity far beyond their years. They weren't dressed like the other attendees. While most were in expensive black coats and designer scarves, these girls wore simple jackets and plain dresses. They looked no older than 8, and there was something eerie in the synchronized way they stood, their hands clasped together, almost as if drawing strength from one another. Luke frowned, trying to place them. He didn't recognize them from any family gatherings, nor did they look like they belonged to any of the business associates who had been at the funeral. Still, there was something about them, something that made his heart race just a little faster, though he couldn't explain why. One of the girls, it was hard to tell which, took a step forward, then hesitated, as if reconsidering. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Luke felt a strange pull. But before he could say anything or move toward them, all 3 of the girls turned in perfect unison and walked away, disappearing behind the oak tree. "Sir, the car is ready," Jack's voice broke through his thoughts. Luke glanced toward where the girls had vanished, then shook his head. It was probably nothing. Maybe they were just curious, or perhaps they were relatives of the cemetery caretaker. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something significant about the encounter. He dismissed it as the grief playing tricks on his mind. As he made his way to the car, the image of the 3 girls lingered in his thoughts. He had never been one to obsess over strangers, but for some reason he couldn't let them go. They had left a mark on him, one that wouldn't fade easily. Later that night, as Luke sat in his sleek Manhattan penthouse overlooking the city's glowing skyline, the encounter replayed in his mind. His hand trembled slightly as he poured himself a glass of scotch, the amber liquid swirling in his glass, catching the dim light of the study. His eyes landed on a photograph of Sarah on the desk beside him. "I miss you," he whispered, his voice cracking, barely audible. Sarah had always been the one to believe that everything happened for a reason. If she were here, she would have told him not to ignore the feeling about the girls. But tonight, the pull to know more was stronger than ever, and he knew it wasn't just his grief clouding his mind. There was something there, something he had to understand. He stood up from his desk, determination in his steps. He wasn't the type to dwell on unimportant details, but for the first time in his life, Luke Montgomery knew he had to investigate this further. The triplets, whoever they were, weren't just a fleeting moment. They were a mystery, one he couldn't ignore. And deep down, he knew this wasn't the last time he would see them. Jackson Montgomery couldn't shake the images of the three girls from his mind. The way they stood at the edge of the cemetery, staring at him with eyes that seemed too old for their faces, it haunted him. He was used to controlling his thoughts, his actions, his emotions, but this felt different. It was as if something had shifted, as if he had stumbled upon a piece of a puzzle that he wasn't supposed to see. That night, as the city lights flickered below his penthouse window, Jackson sat at his desk, his mind racing. He had spent the last several hours doing everything in his power to push the incident out of his thoughts. Business calls, stock reports, emails, the usual distractions. But nothing worked. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw them again. The triplets. Their identical faces, their synchronized movements, their strange intensity. He took a deep breath, reaching for his phone and dialing Thomas. The older man had been with the Montgomery family for decades, and Jackson trusted him implicitly. But even now, he hesitated. What was he even going to ask him? "Hey, can you look up some kids I saw at a funeral? I need to know who they are." The thought felt ridiculous, but that didn't stop him from doing it anyway. "Thomas," Jackson said when the call connected, "I need your help with something." "Yes, sir." Thomas's voice came through the line, always steady, always dependable. "I'm sure you remember the three girls at the cemetery today. The ones standing by the oak tree." There was a brief pause before Thomas responded. "Yes, sir. I remember them. They didn't seem like they belonged to any of the families, but I didn't think much of it at the time." "Right," Jackson said, feeling his heart rate quicken. "I need you to find out who they are. I don't care how. Just do it. Find out everything you can." Another pause, longer this time, before Thomas replied with his usual calm. "Of course, sir. I'll get on it right away." Jackson ended the call and leaned back in his chair, staring at the city that stretched out before him. The lights, the cars, the busy streets below, everything felt so distant now, so meaningless. It had been a long time since he felt this way, pulled in a direction he couldn't control, and for the first time in years, Jackson wondered if this was something he could control at all. The following days were a blur of work, meetings, and waiting. Jackson's mind, however, remained occupied by the triplets. He thought about them constantly, about how they had appeared at the funeral, how their eyes locked with his in that brief, inexplicable moment. They were there for a reason, he was certain of it. On the 5th day after the funeral, Jackson received the call he had been waiting for. "Sir," Thomas's voice came through the phone, low and urgent. "I found them. The girls. Their names are Harper, Haley, and Hannah Montgomery. They live in Brooklyn with their aunt, Charlotte Montgomery. Their mother's name was Meredith Montgomery." Jackson sat up straight in his chair. The mention of Meredith's name struck him like a bolt of lightning. Meredith Montgomery. The woman he had loved so many years ago. The one he had let slip away because of his ambition, his obsession with success. He had never forgotten her, not for a moment. But the memories? They had become buried under years of work, of deals, of building his empire. Meredith Montgomery? Jackson's voice came out hoarse, as if the name hadn't passed his lips in years. What happened to her? She passed away 6 months ago, sir. Leukemia. It seems she raised the girls on her own after you and her parted ways. Jackson felt a wave of guilt wash over him. His mind raced. The timing, those 3 little girls, born 8 years ago, at the exact time he had been in a brief, intense relationship with Meredith. They were his daughters. He had never known, never even suspected. And the girls? Jackson asked, trying to steady his voice. Are they okay? They're struggling, sir, Thomas said, a tinge of concern in his voice. Their mother's death was hard on them. The aunt, Charlotte, has been doing her best to take care of them, but they've been through a lot. Jackson's throat tightened. He had been so focused on his own life, on his career, that he had missed everything. The life Meredith had created, the family they had made without him, all the while he had been oblivious. And now they were his responsibility. A responsibility he hadn't asked for, but could no longer ignore. Thank you, Thomas, Jackson said quietly. I need you to get more information. Birth certificates, school records, everything you can find. Yes, sir, Thomas replied without hesitation. Later that evening, Jackson found himself pacing his penthouse. His world, which had once seemed so controlled, so meticulously planned, now felt like it was crumbling. He was a man who had built everything from the ground up, a man who had crafted his empire with precision and care. Yet here he was, at the mercy of a past he had long buried, a past that had come back to demand his attention. Jackson poured himself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid swirling in the glass, but he didn't drink it. His mind was too distracted by the revelations of the day. The daughters he never knew about. Meredith's death. The way they had appeared at the funeral, as if waiting for him. What did they want from him? And more importantly, what did he owe them? His phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. It was a text from Thomas. I found the girls' birth certificates. Harper Grace Montgomery, Haley Rose Montgomery, and Hannah Faith Montgomery. Born on May 12, 2013. Their father's name was never listed. Jackson's hands shook slightly as he read the message. The confirmation hit him harder than he had expected. These girls, his daughters, had lived without him for 8 years. They had never known him, and he had never known them. He stared at the phone screen, unable to fully process the weight of the words. His daughters. He knew that he had to meet them. But how? How do you approach children who don't even know you exist? And how could he explain the choices he had made all those years ago? Jackson set his glass down on the table, a wave of emotion crashing over him. There was no easy way to do this. There was no simple solution. But one thing was clear. He couldn't ignore them any longer. The next morning, Jackson made a decision. He would go to Brooklyn. He would meet them. He would figure out how to be the father they deserved, even if it meant stepping into a world he didn't understand. And so, for the first time in years, Jackson Montgomery prepared for something that his wealth, his success, and his influence couldn't simply fix. He was about to meet the daughters he never knew he had, and everything about his life was about to change. This was the beginning of something new, something that would not be controlled by spreadsheets, deals, or stock prices. For the first time, Jackson was going to face the human side of his life, the part he had long forgotten in his pursuit of success. And he wasn't sure what it would look like. But one thing was certain. He couldn't keep running from it any longer. The truth was out there, waiting for him. All he had to do was face it. Jackson stood outside the small brownstone in Brooklyn, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The building, though modest, had a warmth to it, a stark contrast to his own cold, impersonal penthouse. His eyes flickered to the door, where he would soon face the 3 little girls who had unknowingly shared his blood for the last 8 years. The past few days had been a whirlwind of emotion and preparation. Jackson had flown to Brooklyn, arranged a meeting with Charlotte Montgomery, their aunt, and now he was about to meet the daughters he never knew existed. The thought was both overwhelming and exhilarating. He was no longer the man who had only known business deals and numbers. For the first time in years, Jackson felt the rawness of human connection, the uncertainty of not being in control. The door opened, and Charlotte, her face soft but reserved, stood in the doorway. "Jackson," she said, her voice cautious but not unwelcoming. "Come in." "Thank you," he replied, his voice betraying a nervousness he didn't usually show. Charlotte stepped aside, allowing him into the cozy living room. The warmth inside was a stark contrast to the chilly air outside, and the space itself felt full of life. Photos on the walls, children's artwork scattered around, and the unmistakable feeling of a home built on love and care. Jackson's gaze immediately settled on the 3 girls who were sitting on the couch, their eyes on him as if studying him. The space was quiet, the kind of silence that only children seem to know how to fill. "Girls," Charlotte said gently, "this is Mr. Montgomery, a friend of your mother's." The girls said nothing at first. They simply stared at him, eyes full of curiosity and suspicion. Harper, the oldest, seemed to be the one in charge. Her gaze was steady, challenging even, as she studied him. Haley, the middle child, was looking at him with a mix of analytical curiosity, her glasses perched on the edge of her nose. And Hannah, the youngest, was the one who seemed the most uncertain, her eyes wide and filled with a quiet, unspoken question. Jackson took a deep breath and tried to steady himself. "Hi," he said softly, kneeling to their level. "Thank you for meeting me. I know this is a little strange, but I wanted to get to know you all." Harper's lips pressed into a firm line. "We don't know you," she said bluntly, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "I understand," Jackson said, his voice calm but firm. "But I'm not here to make things difficult. I just wanted to meet you because, well, because I'm your father." At that, a small gasp escaped Hannah's lips, but she quickly silenced herself, glancing at her sisters as if to gauge their reactions. Haley tilted her head slightly, her calculating mind clearly processing what Jackson had said. "You're our father?" Haley asked, her voice full of disbelief, though her expression remained neutral. "Yes," Jackson said, nodding. "Your mother and I were once very close, and, well, when she passed away, I didn't know about any of you. But now that I do, I want to be here for you." Hannah stood up and walked over to him, tentatively reaching out her hand. "Mom talked about you," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "She said you were smart and you would have done amazing things. But she never told us you were our dad." Jackson's heart clenched at the words. He reached out, taking her hand gently. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't know." The other 2 girls watched silently, unsure of how to react. Harper's gaze softened for a moment, but she quickly masked it with a more guarded expression. "What do you want from us?" Harper asked, her voice still firm, her stance protective of her sisters. "We're fine with Aunt Charlotte." We don't need anyone else. Jackson nodded, his heart heavy. I know you're doing great with her, he said softly. I'm not here to replace anyone. I just want to be part of your life. If you'll let me. Hannah, who had been watching him with wide eyes, now asked, Do you really want to get to know us? Not just because Mom said things about you, but because you care? Jackson felt a lump form in his throat. He had spent years building his empire, climbing to the top of the corporate ladder, and yet here, standing in front of these three young girls, he realized that none of it had ever mattered. His wealth, his influence, they meant nothing in this moment. I do care, he said quietly, more than you'll ever know. Charlotte, who had been standing in the doorway, watching the exchange with a mixture of hope and caution, finally spoke. It's going to take time, Jackson. They've been through a lot. But they need consistency. They need to know they can trust you. Jackson nodded. I understand, he said, and I'll do whatever it takes. I'm not here to rush anything. I just want to be there for them, in whatever way they need. After a long silence, Harper, the oldest, finally uncrossed her arms. We'll see, she said, her voice cautious but not as hostile as before. But we don't make promises. Mom said we should never trust anyone who breaks their word. I respect that, Jackson said. I won't make any promises I can't keep. But I will be here. And I won't go anywhere. The girls exchanged glances, their silent communication passing between them. Finally, Haley spoke up. You can come to our ballet recital this weekend, she said, her voice slightly softer. If you want. Jackson felt a surge of hope. I'd love to, he said, his voice sincere. I'll be there. With that, Charlotte smiled softly. It's a start, she said, and that's all anyone can ask for. Jackson stood up, feeling the weight of the moment. This was the first step. It wasn't much, but it was something. He had spent so many years building walls around himself, afraid of what would happen if he ever let anyone in. But now, for the first time, he realized that these three little girls were the ones who could break down those walls. And maybe, just maybe, they would show him what it truly meant to be part of a family. As he left the brownstone that afternoon, Jackson looked up at the sky, the clouds parting just enough to let a few rays of sunlight through. It felt like a new beginning, and he was ready to embrace it, whatever it took. The following days were filled with anticipation and uncertainty for Jackson Montgomery. He had made the decision to be a part of his daughters' lives, but the road ahead was still unclear. Despite the small step forward they had taken, Jackson knew that it would take time, patience, and a lot of effort to earn their trust. The seeds had been planted, but it was up to him to nurture them. Saturday arrived, the day of the ballet recital. Jackson had promised to attend, and he wasn't about to break that promise. He dressed in a casual black suit, making sure to look presentable, but not too formal. He wanted to be approachable, to blend in with the other parents and guardians. The nervous excitement that had been building in him over the past week was palpable, and as he stepped out of his apartment, he couldn't help but feel a knot in his stomach. When he arrived at the theater, the atmosphere was a mix of bustling parents, excited children, and the soft hum of classical music warming up in the background. Jackson stood at the entrance, looking around, his eyes scanning for the three girls he had only recently learned were his daughters. Then he saw them. Harper, Haley, and Hannah stood backstage with their Aunt Charlotte, wearing their ballet costumes. The soft pink tutus of the triplets fluttered slightly as they moved. Their faces were a little more relaxed now, but their eyes still held that cautious curiosity whenever they looked at him. Jackson noticed that they hadn't yet spotted him, so he took a deep breath and walked toward them, trying to calm the nervous energy that surged through him. Charlotte, spotting him first, smiled politely. "You made it," she said, her tone warm but guarded. "I wouldn't miss it," Jackson replied, his voice steady, though he could feel his heart racing. He turned his attention to the girls, who were now looking at him. Harper was the first to speak, her expression neutral but softer than before. "You came," she said, her voice a little more open than when they first met. "That's good. I promised, didn't I?" Jackson replied, smiling gently. "I wouldn't break a promise." Hannah, standing off to the side, looked up at him with a small smile. "Thank you for coming to watch us dance," she said quietly. There was something in her voice that felt tentative. It was as if she was still unsure but willing to give him a chance. Haley, ever the analyzer, observed him closely before asking, "Did you watch Mom dance too?" Her glasses reflected the soft stage lights as she tilted her head, her voice carrying the sharpness of a child who notices everything. Jackson swallowed hard, his throat tightening at the mention of Meredith. "I did," he said softly. "She was amazing. Just like you three." The girls seemed to accept that answer, and after a brief moment of silence, Charlotte spoke up. "They're ready to go on stage. If you'd like, you can take a seat. It's about to start." Jackson nodded, stepping back as the girls prepared to go on. He found a seat in the audience, his eyes not leaving them as they took their places. The lights dimmed, and the music began. The triplets glided across the stage with the same synchronized grace that he had noticed in their movements ever since he first saw them at the cemetery. As they danced, Jackson's heart swelled with pride, a deep, unexpected emotion that caught him off guard. He had never expected to feel this way about children, especially not children he had only just discovered were his. But there they were, his daughters, dancing like they had been born to do it, and every movement seemed to echo with the same rhythm of love and determination that Meredith had carried all those years ago. The performance ended, and the audience erupted in applause. Jackson was on his feet before he even realized it, clapping louder than everyone else, his chest swelling with admiration. He had missed so much, but in that moment he was proud. Proud of them. Proud of what they had accomplished, even without him. After the performance, the triplets came down from the stage, their faces flushed with excitement and exertion. They spotted him immediately, and this time their smiles were more genuine, their gazes softer. "You were great," Jackson said, kneeling down to meet them at eye level. His heart was full as he looked at each of their faces. Harper, who had always seemed the most guarded, gave him a small but sincere smile. "Thanks," she said, her voice no longer defensive, but warm. "You were not bad. Not bad." Jackson chuckled. "I think you three are the ones who were amazing. I just came to watch." Hannah giggled, her smile lighting up her entire face. "You came to watch us. That's good enough." Haley adjusted her glasses, still analytical but with a touch of softness in her eyes. "You should come to more recitals," she said, a slight challenge in her voice. "We can show you how we improve." "I'd love that," Jackson said, his voice full of sincerity. "I'll be there. All of them. If you'll let me." Charlotte stood behind them, watching the exchange with a quiet smile. Jackson noticed the subtle nod she gave him, an unspoken approval of the progress they had made. It wasn't much, but it was something. And for Jackson, that was more than enough. As the girls walked toward the dressing room with Charlotte, Jackson stayed behind for a moment, reflecting on what had just happened. This small victory, the trust, the tentative acceptance, felt like a step in the right direction. He had no illusions. There was still so much to learn about his daughters, about being a father. But this was a start. And for now, that was all he could ask for. The next few weeks were a blur of ballet recitals, school events, and quiet dinners. Jackson made a point to be present, showing up at the girls' performances, helping them with their homework, and attending their school events. Each time, he felt a little closer to them, but still, there were barriers, walls of pain and confusion built up over years of absence. But Jackson was patient. He had learned, over the years, that the best things in life took time. And this, he hoped, would be no different. As time passed, Harper, Haley, and Hannah began to look at him not just as a man who was trying to insert himself into their lives, but as someone they could trust. They didn't call him Dad yet. That word still felt too big, too heavy, but they were learning to see him as part of their world. And that was enough for Jackson for now. One evening, after a ballet class, Harper walked up to him, her expression serious but not cold. "I need your help with something," she said, surprising him. "Anything," Jackson replied immediately. "I want to learn how to play piano," she said. "But I don't know how." Jackson smiled softly, his heart swelling with affection. "I can teach you," he said. "We'll start tomorrow. Just you and me." And as Harper nodded, a small but significant step toward opening her heart to him, Jackson realized that this was the beginning of something that would last, something that would grow, with time, into the kind of love and connection he had always longed for but had never known how to find. For the first time in years, Jackson felt truly at home. The weeks following the ballet recital passed in a blur of routine and small, meaningful moments. Jackson had learned the importance of consistency. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic proclamations. It was about showing up, being present, and slowly earning the trust of the three girls who had, up until recently, been strangers to him. He spent more time with them, attending their practices, sitting in the bleachers at school events, and occasionally joining Charlotte for dinner. Little by little, Jackson started to feel like he was becoming a part of their lives, not as a father just yet, but as someone they could rely on. Harper, though still reserved, had begun to show a glimmer of trust. Haley's analytical mind seemed to enjoy the intellectual discussions they shared over books or science projects, while Hannah, always the most emotional, had begun to let him in, sharing her thoughts and feelings, albeit in small doses. One Saturday afternoon, Jackson arrived at the brownstone a little earlier than usual. He had planned a surprise, a small project to do with the girls. He had spoken with Charlotte earlier in the week and learned that Harper had recently shown an interest in learning how to play the piano. It was a quiet interest, something she'd kept to herself for a while, but Jackson was determined to support her in whatever way he could. When he arrived, Charlotte greeted him with a warm smile. "You're early today. The girls will be so surprised." "I know," Jackson said with a grin, "but I think I've got something they'll love." Harper, Haley, and Hannah came into the living room shortly after, and Jackson stood up to greet them. "Hey, you three. I've got a little surprise for you today." "What is it?" Haley asked, her sharp eyes already suspicious. "Yeah, what's going on?" Harper said, her voice cool but curious. "You know how Harper's been talking about learning the piano?" Jackson began, his voice light, trying to keep the mood casual. "Well, I've arranged for us to have a little music session. I thought it might be fun for all of us to learn together, but especially for you, Harper." Harper's eyes widened, her surprise evident. "Wait, you mean, like a real piano?" "Yeah," Jackson nodded. "I thought we could start with the basics. Maybe some scales, simple melodies. And if you like it, we'll keep going. What do you think?" Harper was silent for a moment, her eyes flicking from Jackson to Haley and then to Hannah, as if trying to read their reactions. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter than usual. I think that sounds nice. Hannah, who had been watching the exchange with excitement, jumped up. Can I help? I've always wanted to learn too. Of course, Jackson said, smiling warmly. The more, the merrier. The piano was placed in the corner of the living room, and Jackson showed the girls how to sit at the bench, explaining the basics of the keys, the notes, and the rhythm. Harper, ever the perfectionist, immediately took to the task, her fingers hovering over the keys with careful precision. Haley, analytical as ever, began to analyze the sound, questioning the intervals between the notes and how they created harmony. And then there was Hannah, her hands light on the keys, creating melodies that, while imperfect, were filled with emotion and raw talent. The lesson was simple, but it was something Jackson would never forget. For the first time, the walls between him and the girls seemed to be crumbling, replaced by something far more powerful: connection. They weren't just learning music, they were learning to be a family, one note at a time. As the lesson came to a close, the girls gathered around Jackson, their eyes shining with excitement. This was fun, Hannah exclaimed, her voice full of energy. Can we do it again next weekend? Jackson chuckled, his heart full. Absolutely. We'll make it a regular thing. How does that sound? Good, Harper said, her voice more relaxed than it had been in a long time. I think I might actually enjoy this. Haley, ever the thinker, adjusted her glasses. It's interesting how the sound of the notes changes depending on where you press. I could get used to this. Jackson smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. This was progress. This was a breakthrough. Later that evening, as he sat on the couch with Charlotte, he realized how much things had changed in such a short time. The girls had slowly opened up to him, each in their own way. They were no longer just the daughters of a woman he had loved years ago. They were his daughters, and they were teaching him just as much as he was teaching them. Charlotte watched him with a knowing look. They've really taken to you, haven't they? Jackson nodded, his gaze thoughtful. I think they have. And I'm not going anywhere. I'm here to stay. Charlotte smiled softly. You know, they've never had a man in their lives like this. They've had their mother, and then me, but you. You're different. Jackson's smile faded slightly. I don't want to replace anyone, he said quietly. I just want to be here for them, in whatever way I can. And if they'll let me, I want to be their father. Charlotte reached over and placed a hand on his arm. They'll let you. It'll take time, but they'll let you. As Jackson sat back in his seat, watching the girls continue to practice their piano skills, he realized just how much had changed in the few months since he first met them. He had walked into their lives unsure of his place, but now he knew he was exactly where he needed to be. The following weeks saw a steady growth in Jackson's relationship with the girls. He continued to attend their school events, help them with homework, and spend time teaching them piano. Slowly, the walls between them came down, brick by brick. One evening, after a particularly successful piano practice, Harper approached him, her expression serious. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" she asked, her voice hesitant. "Of course," Jackson said, his heart racing slightly. He followed her into the kitchen, where they could talk privately. "I know we've been doing the piano thing for a while," Harper began, her voice quieter than usual, "and I appreciate it. I think it's cool that you're doing this with us. But I want to know something." "Anything," Jackson said, his voice soft but sincere. "Do you really want to be our dad?" she asked, her eyes searching his face. "Or is this just something you're doing because you feel guilty about what happened with Mom?" Jackson felt the weight of her question settle in his chest. It was a question he had been asking himself for weeks now. But it wasn't guilt that brought him here. It was love. And he was ready to admit it, even if it scared him. "I want to be your dad," he said, his voice steady. "Not because of guilt, but because I care about you. All three of you. I can't change the past, but I'm here now. And I want to be part of your future." Harper studied him for a long moment, and then, for the first time, she smiled. "Okay," she said softly. "Then let's do this. Let's be a family." Jackson's heart soared as he looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. He had finally found his place in their lives. It wasn't perfect, and there would be challenges ahead, but in that moment, Jackson knew he had finally found the family he had been searching for all these years. As the weeks turned into months, Jackson's life began to shift in ways he hadn't expected. What started as an awkward, tentative attempt to connect with his daughters had transformed into something deeper, something real. Every visit, every piano lesson, every shared moment at dinner or at the park brought them closer, though there were still days when the walls felt too high, the distances too far. It was a Sunday afternoon when Jackson found himself at the triplets' school recital. He had been to several of their performances already: piano recitals, ballet showcases, and even the school play where Hannah had starred as the lead, but this one felt different. Today, Harper, Haley, and Hannah were going to be performing a piece of music they had been working on for months. It was a new challenge for them, combining both their individual talents and their ability to work together as a team. As Jackson sat in the back row, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride swell in his chest. Watching them on stage was always an emotional experience for him. Harper, the ever-determined leader, focused intently on the piano keys. Haley, her mind always analyzing, held a violin and blended her precise movements into the music, and Hannah, who had the most expressive soul of them all, poured her heart into the cello, her eyes closed as if lost in the rhythm. They were magnificent, and as Jackson watched them, he couldn't help but think how far they had all come, how far he had come. After the performance, Jackson was waiting in the lobby for them. They came rushing toward him, faces flushed with excitement. "You were amazing," Jackson said, grinning as he stood to greet them. "You liked it?" Harper asked, her voice a little uncertain but proud. "Liked it?" "I loved it," Jackson said. "You were all incredible." Hannah bounced on her toes, clearly thrilled. "It felt really good to play together like that. We've been practicing so hard." "I could tell," Jackson said, kneeling down to their level. "You've worked so hard for this. You should be proud of yourselves." Haley, always the thinker, adjusted her glasses and said, "We've got a new challenge now, though. It's even harder than this one." She gave him a mischievous grin, clearly proud of the new goal they had set for themselves. "What is it?" Jackson asked, intrigued by her enthusiasm. "We're going to learn a new piece together," she said with determination. "It's going to take all of us, but we think we can do it." Jackson smiled. "I know you can. If you can pull off what I just saw, there's nothing you can't do." Over the next few weeks, Jackson found himself more involved than ever before. The girls had become comfortable with him in a way he hadn't expected. Harper was still reserved, but she no longer shut him out completely. Haley had become more open in their conversations, her sharp mind asking questions about everything from the way the markets worked to how music was structured. And Hannah, sweet and sensitive, had come to him with more personal questions about the world, asking about his own childhood and the things that shaped who he was. One evening, as Jackson was driving them home from an art gallery they had visited, Hannah spoke up from the back seat. "Dad, can I ask you something?" she said, her voice tentative but curious. Jackson's heart skipped at the word "Dad." He had longed for this moment, but now that it was happening, it felt surreal. "Of course," he said, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. "Did you ever want kids?" she asked, her voice soft and thoughtful. Before you met Mom." Jackson took a deep breath, the question catching him off guard. He thought about it for a moment before answering. "I always wanted a family, Hannah," he said, his voice quiet. "I think I was just too focused on my work, on my career. I thought I could be happy without it. But I was wrong." "Why didn't you ever tell Mom you wanted kids?" she asked, her voice full of innocence and wisdom beyond her years. "I didn't know how," he admitted. "I thought my life was already set in a certain way, and I was scared to change it." "Sometimes change is good," Hannah said softly, almost as if she were teaching him something. "It can be scary, but it's good." Jackson smiled softly, his heart swelling with emotion. "You're right. Change can be good." The following Saturday, Jackson found himself at a different kind of event. This time, it wasn't a performance or recital. It was a family event at the park, organized by Charlotte, where all the kids and parents gathered for a day of games, food, and bonding. Jackson had been invited, and though he had spent most of his adult life in boardrooms and high-stakes meetings, he felt a sense of nervous excitement as he prepared to attend his first family day with the girls. As he arrived at the park, the familiar feeling of being out of place crept up on him. The other parents were chatting and laughing with their kids, but Jackson was standing alone for a moment, unsure of how to jump in. His anxiety was palpable, but before he could retreat, he saw Harper, Haley, and Hannah running toward him, their faces lighting up when they saw him. "Dad!" Hannah called out, her voice high with excitement. "Come play with us." Jackson hesitated for a moment, his mind racing. He had never been good at sports, at games, or at being the fun dad. But seeing their eager faces, he realized this was another opportunity to connect with them. He nodded, his voice steady but with a hint of nerves. "All right, what are we playing?" "We're playing soccer," Haley said, her analytical mind already plotting strategies for their game. "You'll be on my team." "I'm on Harper's team," Hannah declared, grabbing his hand and pulling him along. As they played, Jackson felt the tension in his shoulders ease. He wasn't the best at soccer, he wasn't even close, but the joy in their laughter, the way they all worked together, made him forget about everything else. For the first time in years, Jackson felt like he truly belonged. He wasn't just some distant figure in their lives. He was part of their world. And that meant everything. As the day ended and the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the park, the girls huddled around Jackson. "Thanks for playing, Dad," Harper said, her voice no longer cold, but full of warmth. "You're welcome, sweetheart," Jackson said, his voice thick with emotion. He looked at them all, his daughters, Harper, Haley, and Hannah. They had become more than just his children by chance. They had become the family he had always wanted, even when he didn't know it. That night, as Jackson lay in bed, he thought back on everything that had happened, everything that had led him to this moment. He had been given a second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. He was going to continue showing up, being present, and building a life with his daughters. One step at a time. As the months passed, Jackson's life began to take on a new rhythm. The business deals, once his sole focus, no longer consumed him the way they used to. His days were filled with meetings, of course, but now they were balanced with afternoons spent with Harper, Haley, and Hannah. Saturday mornings were for pancakes and board games, Sundays for visits to the park or the museum, and weekday evenings for piano practice or science projects. Jackson found himself slipping into the role of a father more naturally than he had ever imagined. One particular evening, as Jackson arrived at the brownstone, he noticed a slight change in the house. The living room, once filled with the organized chaos of Charlotte's and the girls' busy lives, now felt even warmer. There was something about the little details, the photos of their various adventures, the small trinkets and drawings scattered about, that made it feel more like a family home. It felt like his family, even if he hadn't been there from the very start. The girls had become more open with him, more comfortable. Harper still maintained a certain level of guardedness, but Jackson could see the walls beginning to crumble, bit by bit. Haley had become even more curious about the world, always asking Jackson to explain things about his work, his travels, or the stock market. Hannah, with her gentle spirit, was more affectionate, always finding a way to express herself, whether through her art or her thoughtful words. Jackson had learned to navigate their individual needs and personalities, and while he knew they still had a long way to go, there was a sense of hope. This was a family in the making, and it was more than he had ever dreamed of. One evening, as they sat down for dinner, Harper suddenly spoke up. "Dad," she said, her voice steady, yet somehow vulnerable, "can we talk?" Jackson paused mid-bite, immediately putting his fork down. He had become accustomed to these moments, where the girls would want to discuss something important. "Of course," he said, his voice calm. "We were talking," she began, glancing at Haley and then at Hannah. About what we want for the future. And, well, we've decided that we want to start having family vacations. Like, real vacations." Jackson felt a smile tug at the corners of his mouth. "Family vacations?" He repeated, a little surprised by the request. "That sounds wonderful. What kind of vacations?" "You know," Haley said, her tone analytical as always, "places we can visit together, maybe somewhere with a beach. Somewhere we can all relax and have fun." "I want to go to the mountains," Hannah added with a grin, her eyes sparkling, "where we can see all the animals and make snowmen." Jackson's heart swelled. "That sounds perfect," he said. "A vacation it is. Where would you like to go first?" They spent the rest of the dinner discussing their dream destinations, from beach resorts to mountain cabins, until they finally settled on a week-long trip to a lakeside cabin upstate. It was exactly the kind of place they could all enjoy, with hiking, kayaking, and even a small town nearby to explore. Jackson made a mental note to start the planning the next morning, eager to make this trip a reality for them. The weeks leading up to their family vacation were filled with excitement and anticipation. Jackson had taken the lead on organizing everything, booking the cabin, arranging transportation, and ensuring the girls' favorite activities would be included. He found himself navigating the process with the same precision he applied to his business ventures, but this time it felt personal. This was about creating memories, not just checking boxes. Finally, the day of departure arrived. The car was packed, and the girls were bouncing with energy as they piled into the back seat, chattering about the things they were looking forward to. As Jackson drove out of the city, he felt a sense of relief wash over him. He was leaving behind the noise of the corporate world, the constant pressure, and stepping into something far more meaningful. He was embarking on a journey with the three people who had come to matter more than anything else. When they arrived at the cabin, it was everything they had hoped for, rustic yet comfortable, with a clear view of the lake and surrounded by dense woods. The girls ran around, exploring the area with the excitement only children could have when faced with a new adventure. They took turns showing Jackson their favorite spots in the area. Hannah led him to a small cove near the water, where they could watch the ducks swimming, while Harper and Haley showed him the perfect hiking trail that would lead them to a waterfall. Later that evening, after a day of exploring, the family gathered around the fire pit outside the cabin. The crackling of the fire, the smell of roasted marshmallows, and the cool air filled the evening with a sense of peace that Jackson hadn't felt in years. For the first time, he felt truly content. "This is nice," Jackson said as he looked at the three girls sitting across from him, their faces illuminated by the warm glow of the fire. "I can't remember the last time I felt like this." "It's perfect," Harper said, her voice softer than usual. "Thanks for bringing us here." "I'm glad you like it," Jackson said, his eyes meeting hers. "We're going to do this more often. Family vacations, memories. This is just the beginning." The next few days passed in a blur of fun and laughter. The girls learned how to paddle a canoe, they took long hikes through the woods, and in the evenings they played board games and watched the stars come out. Each night they would sit around the fire, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. Jackson felt a deep sense of gratitude. For the first time, he was a part of something that felt real, that felt lasting. On their final day, as they sat by the lake, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, Jackson found himself reflecting on how much had changed in his life. He had come so far, from the distant, work-focused man he used to be, to the father who was now part of a family. He had built his empire, but none of it had ever given him the sense of fulfillment that he now had with these three girls. "This was amazing," Haley said, her voice thoughtful. "We should come back every year." "I agree," Jackson said, smiling. "Every year. We'll make this a tradition." As the sun dipped below the horizon, the family sat in peaceful silence, each of them content with the moment. Jackson knew that this was just the beginning of their journey together, and he was ready for whatever came next. The sun hung low in the sky as Jackson sat on the porch of their lakeside cabin, the faint sound of the wind rustling through the trees mingling with the laughter of his daughters. It had been nearly a week since they'd arrived at the cabin, and the trip had been everything they'd hoped for, and more. Jackson had come to realize that the moments like these, simple but profound, were the ones that mattered most. His life, once so focused on business, was now centered around the three girls who had unknowingly become the center of his world. As the last night of their trip approached, the girls gathered around the fire pit one more time. Their faces were bright with the joy of the week's adventures, and Jackson couldn't help but smile as he watched them interact. Harper, still the protector, had spent her time making sure everyone was safe and well. Haley, with her inquisitive mind, had already started researching nearby hiking trails for future trips. And Hannah, always the free spirit, had taken Jackson to secret spots around the lake, sharing the peace and serenity she found in nature. That evening, as they all sat around the fire, roasting marshmallows and talking about their favorite moments from the trip, Jackson felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over him. This wasn't just a vacation. It was the beginning of something new. This was a family, built not just on blood, but on love and shared experiences. "You know, we should do this every year," Harper said, her voice thoughtful but sincere. "Come up here. It's peaceful here. I like it." "I think it's a great idea," Jackson agreed. "And it's not just about the place. It's about the time we spent together. This is something we'll keep doing. We'll make it a tradition." Hannah, her face illuminated by the glow of the fire, added, "Maybe next year we can bring Grandma and Grandpa. We can all stay together." Jackson's heart swelled at the thought. The trip had been an eye-opening experience, and his relationship with the girls had blossomed in ways he had never imagined. His heart ached for all the years he had missed, but he knew that the future they were building together was worth everything he had sacrificed. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Hannah," he said softly. "The more, the merrier. But for now, let's focus on tonight. On us." Haley, ever the one to analyze things, broke the brief silence. "Dad, do you know what I've been thinking?" Her voice was full of curiosity. "We've been doing so many new things, so many firsts. I think it would be fun to make a list of things we want to do as a family, things we've never done before, like our own bucket list. Jackson raised an eyebrow, intrigued. A bucket list? Yeah, Haley continued. Like places we want to visit, things we want to learn together, activities we want to try. I like that idea, Jackson said. But we can't just do it once and forget about it. We have to keep it going. Every year, we add to it. A family tradition. That's the point, Harper added. We keep it alive. It'll be our thing. The fire crackled as the girls threw another log on, and Jackson felt a sense of peace settle in his chest. For the first time in his life, he understood what it truly meant to be part of a family. It wasn't just about being present physically. It was about investing time, energy, and love into the people who mattered most. It was about showing up, making memories, and building a future together. The next day, as they packed up their things and prepared to leave the cabin, Jackson realized that he had never been more reluctant to leave a place. The thought of returning to the busy streets of the city, with its fast-paced life and constant demands, felt foreign to him now. He had grown accustomed to the quiet moments, morning coffee with the girls, afternoon walks by the lake, and evenings spent by the fire. "We'll come back," he reassured the girls as they finished packing. "This is just the first of many trips. We'll make sure to always have time for family." "I can't wait to see where we'll go next," Haley said, looking out the window at the view one last time. "Maybe we'll go to the beach next," Hannah suggested, her voice full of excitement. Jackson chuckled, glancing at Charlotte, who had been quietly observing the girls and their interactions. "I think we'll make that happen, too." Charlotte nodded. "It's good to see you all like this. I can tell you've made a real connection." Jackson met her gaze and smiled, a sense of fulfillment washing over him. "I didn't know how much I needed this until I found it," he admitted. "I'm just glad I didn't wait too long." Back in the city, life slowly returned to its usual pace. Jackson's work began to pick up again, with meetings and negotiations filling his calendar, but the rhythm of his days had changed. He still maintained his professional life, but now it was balanced with time for his daughters. He no longer viewed his work as the center of his universe. It was just a part of it. His family was now his priority. At home, the girls were flourishing. Harper was becoming more open, sharing her thoughts and dreams with Jackson, while Haley's analytical mind continued to question the world, diving deeper into her studies. And Hannah, the artist, continued to create, drawing and painting her way through the world with a gentle heart and a vivid imagination. One afternoon, as Jackson sat with the girls over hot chocolate, Haley brought up something that had been on her mind. "Dad," she said, her tone serious, "I've been thinking about our bucket list." Jackson raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What about it?" "We should write it down," she said, already pulling out a notebook. "We need to keep track of all the things we've done and all the things we still want to do. It'll help us remember everything." "I agree," Jackson said, smiling. "And let's make sure we keep it going. Every year, we check things off and add new things." As Haley wrote down their first official bucket list, the room fell into a comfortable silence. Jackson looked at his daughters, each of them unique, each of them special in their own way, and felt an overwhelming sense of love and responsibility. He had been given the gift of time, of family, and he wasn't going to take that for granted. The next morning, Jackson surprised the girls with a small, handwritten note. "I've been thinking," he said, handing it to them. "How about we all add to the list? I'll take the first step." On the list was Jackson's contribution, a trip to the Scottish Highlands, a place of great importance to your mom. The girls looked up at him, their eyes filled with curiosity and understanding. This was more than just a family bucket list. It was a bridge between the past and the future, a tribute to Meredith and the legacy she had left behind, and a promise to the girls that, no matter what, their future would be filled with love, adventure, and the shared experiences of a family that would never let go. The weeks following their trip to the cabin were filled with a new kind of energy for Jackson and his daughters. They had returned to their usual routine, but everything seemed different now. Every Sunday felt like a family day, whether they spent it in Central Park or at the museum, and their evening dinners together were no longer just a formality. They had become a time for sharing, learning, and bonding. Jackson had been careful not to rush things, not wanting to force a relationship, but allowing it to develop organically. But something remarkable had happened. The walls that had once stood between him and the girls, built from years of absence and missed opportunities, had slowly crumbled. They weren't just accepting him into their lives, they were actively seeking him out. Harper, always the most reserved, had started coming to him for advice on everything, from her schoolwork to her dreams of becoming a writer. Haley's intellectual curiosity had grown even more, often asking Jackson about his experiences in the business world and wanting to understand how things worked behind the scenes. And Hannah, with her kind heart and artistic soul, had become the most affectionate, always reaching out for a hug or sharing one of her drawings with him. Despite all the progress, there were still moments of uncertainty. Jackson knew they were still healing. It had been months since they started to come together as a family, but he knew that time and patience were still required. They had built something fragile but beautiful, and he was determined to nurture it. One evening, after a particularly exhausting week of work, Jackson was sitting in the living room, reading a book. The house was quiet, the only sound being the soft hum of the city outside. He had just finished a meeting with a business partner and was grateful for the stillness, but it was an unfamiliar feeling. The silence used to comfort him, but now it felt hollow without the laughter of his daughters filling the space. Just then, the door to the living room creaked open, and Hannah stepped inside, her eyes lighting up when she saw him. "Dad," she said softly, "can we talk?" Jackson closed his book and smiled warmly. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" Hannah hesitated for a moment, then walked over and sat next to him on the couch. "I was thinking about the Scottish Highlands," she said, her voice quiet but full of wonder. "I know it was Mom's dream. Do you think we'll ever go there?" The question caught Jackson by surprise, but it made his heart ache in the most beautiful way. It was clear that Hannah had been thinking about her mother a lot lately, something Jackson had expected. Her memories of Meredith were still fresh, and even though they had made so many new ones together, her mother's presence was still deeply felt. "We will go, Hannah," Jackson said softly, his voice filled with certainty. "It's on our list, and we'll make it happen. Your mom would have loved for us to see it together." Hannah smiled and leaned against him, her small body warm against his side. "I'm glad you're our dad," she said simply. Jackson felt his throat tighten. "I'm glad, too." As they sat there in the quiet, Jackson realized just how far they had come. His heart swelled with love for these girls who had changed his life, and for the first time, he could honestly say that he felt at peace. The next few days passed with the usual whirlwind of activities, but Jackson found himself more focused on the future, on building the life he wanted for his family. He began to make concrete plans for their trip to the Scottish Highlands, researching everything from the best time to visit to the activities they could do once they arrived. It was more than just a trip. It was a bridge to the past and a celebration of everything Meredith had left behind, as well as everything they had built together as a family. On the weekend, Jackson took the girls to a quiet bookstore near their apartment. It had always been one of their favorite spots, with shelves full of old and new books, cozy corners to read in, and the smell of coffee in the air. Jackson knew it was a special place for the girls, a place where they could escape into the worlds created in the pages of books. As they walked through the aisles, Harper pulled Jackson aside. "Dad," she said quietly, "there's something I've been thinking about. I've been writing a lot lately. Stories and poems. I've been wondering if maybe I could show you some of them." Jackson's heart warmed. Harper, who had always been so careful with her emotions, was now opening up to him in a way that made him feel incredibly proud. "I'd love to see them, Harper," he said, his voice soft. "You've been working hard on your writing. I can't wait to read it." Harper smiled shyly and handed him a notebook she had been carrying. "Here," she said. "It's not perfect, but it's a start." Jackson took the notebook, his hands shaking slightly as he opened it. The words inside were raw, beautiful, and full of emotion. He could feel Harper's heart in every line, in every sentence. The stories she had written weren't just about the world around her. They were a reflection of herself, of her journey, of how she saw the world. And Jackson realized, with a lump in his throat, that the daughter he had once barely known was now sharing her deepest thoughts with him. "Harper, these are amazing," he said, his voice full of awe. "I can't wait to read more. I think you've got a real talent here." Harper beamed, the pride on her face more than enough to make Jackson's heart swell with emotion. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Jackson felt a sense of deep contentment. The house was full of chatter and laughter as the girls discussed everything from school projects to upcoming weekend plans. Jackson watched them, the three girls who had taught him more about love and family than he ever thought possible. Haley, who had been unusually quiet during dinner, finally spoke up, breaking the silence. "Dad," she said, her tone thoughtful, "I've been thinking about what you said last week, about making our bucket list and doing new things together." Jackson looked at her, curious. "What's on your mind?" "Well," Haley said, adjusting her glasses and looking down at her plate, "maybe we could do something big next. Something that we can all check off together. Maybe a volunteer project. Something that lets us give back." Jackson was taken aback by her suggestion, but smiled at the idea. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Haley. It's something we can all do together. Let's add it to the list." The girls exchanged looks, nodding in agreement. Jackson could see how much they had grown, how much they had learned about themselves and each other, and he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The next few months were filled with planning and new adventures. Jackson took the girls to a local animal shelter to volunteer, where they spent a Saturday helping care for the animals and organizing supplies. It was hard work, but it was the kind of work that made them all feel connected, to each other and to the world around them. They were giving back, as a family, and Jackson had never felt prouder.